During a high school class project, my teacher told me it's unrealistic being a CEO. It's been my dream to be a CEO since I was 10. So I told her, it is realistic. Follow me on my journey to learn what it takes to become a CEO. Welcome to another episode of the Realistic CEO podcast. Today I'm here with Will Weche. How are you doing today, Will?
I can't complain, man. Life is good.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate you for coming on. Your story was inspiring to me when I remember hearing you speak. So I definitely wanted to have you come onto my podcast so you can share your knowledge with the people that need it. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Before we get started, I want to thank Urban Coworks for allowing us to use their space as a way to have our podcast be produced today. So if you want to check out Urban Coworks, go to urbancoworks.com. You can have office space. If you are looking for some office space, check them out. So, Will, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what is your purpose?
Sure. Really great question. So my name, as you guys heard before, Will Weche. I'm the founder and CEO of Willful Change, which is a local training and development firm that specializes in leadership development for nonprofit organizations. My purpose is really to focus on really supporting organizational leaderships within the nonprofit sector of learning how and having the necessary tools and supports that are essential for them to lead this workforce, this diverse workforce that we have in today's society.
Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to how you got to where you are today?
Sure. A long story that's still being written. Originally from New York, but moved out to Massachusetts officially in 2017. Before that, I was actually working for a nonprofit organization, and I guess that was kind of God's way of placing me in a setting where I would blossom into the person that I am today. Holding a leadership role while I was working for my former employer, it really helped to shape the type of person that I am, but also gave me the necessary information that I felt that I would need in order to develop strong content, but to also see firsthand where are some of the challenges as well as the skill gaps that are often shared in the various communities of nonprofit organizations. So that kind of led me into thinking for myself, because I have a degree in business administration, but I didn't really know what type of business I wanted to open up. I can recall one night a voice was speaking to me, and I always attribute that out to God, asking me that question that led to what my purpose was, which was think of the time that you felt the most fulfilled, and in that moment, what were you doing? And when that question sat with me for a little bit, I started thinking about all the times in my life that I felt the most fulfilled. And it was always a time where I was either speaking in front of a crowd, coaching someone, or even training. And that's where it just been the big three, right? Speaking, training, coaching. And from there, I decided that I wanted to leap into something like this a little bit more full time. And here I am today.
So I want to talk about, you said you started off as a leadership position inside a nonprofit and then turned into helping leaders in nonprofits. So as somebody that trains leaders, what are some differences that you see in a good leader versus a bad leader?
Some of the differences, I wouldn't necessarily call anyone good or bad, but one thing that I would say is awareness, self-awareness. When I'm assessing an organization to find out where they are currently right now in terms of their leadership culture and where they would like to be, and then I'm trying to assess what are some of those skill gaps. One of the common skill gaps that I'm often recognizing is a lack of self-awareness in terms of what type of leader I am. Because if we don't know ourselves, it's difficult for us to lead somebody else. Because who we are as a leader is what's going to shape our decisions, is what's going to shape our communication, is what's going to shape how we interact with other people. And if I'm not able to regulate or flex or adapt that leadership style in various scenarios and with various different personality types, it makes it very difficult for me to motivate. It makes it very difficult for me to lead. It makes it very difficult for me to be that type of person that person needs me to be. And one of the things that I also find that's very common is people often confuse leadership with management, two different things. One of my mentors, John C. Maxwell, he shares that leadership is the development of people, process, and performance, whereas management is the actual work of people, process, and performance, right? Where you're actually working on those things as opposed to developing. Does that make sense?
Yes. So you started a business where you're helping leaders. What was the startup cost and how did you end up coming up with that idea to start out your own business?
Sure. I'll kind of take it back in terms of earning my certification. I can then consider that as part of my startup cost. But because this was more of a home-based business, I primarily focused on earning my certification through the John Maxwell team. That was something that was close to around maybe $4,000, which happened to be the biggest investment I've ever made in myself. Prior to that, I've been very cautious with money, trying to save and be smart about things like that. But this time I said, you know what, I'm actually going to bet on myself. So that was part of my startup cost. But then I also consulted with a small consulting firm that was helping me with formulating my business in terms of getting my LLC started up. So that was an additional, I would say, anywhere from $1,500 to about $2,000, $1,500 to $2,000. So overall, startup was about $6,000. But again, when I had that strong conviction of becoming a CEO of my own company and actually having a vision for what it was that I wanted to do, I felt that there was no amount of money that could stand in my way.
So you talked about how you were always concerned with your money, but you were able to take that leap. How were you able to take that leap and knowing that you're going to be able to do good with this business?
That's what we call it, a leap of faith, because nothing is guaranteed. There's nothing that's certain. And for me, I just felt that I had the talent, I had the skills, and I went through this process, which most business owners go through, or I should say all business owners go through, which is called a proof of concept, right? Where you have an idea or a concept in your mind, but you have an opportunity to seed that idea with others, so people that are going to become your potential clients, to see if this is something that actually resonates with them, first and foremost. But two, it also gives you an opportunity to see if this is something people are willing to pay for. So because I was able to be successful in that proof of concept phase, I had that surety within me that this was something that was actually going to be successful. How successful, I couldn't really tell. But again, really pointing it back to my faith base, my religion, but all my faith in God. I knew that with his support, and because it was him that was directing me, I knew that I was going to be successful. Because if I can be completely honest with you, the time that I did make the transition from working full time to actually going into my business full time was a lot sooner than I actually expected. Actually, 2 years sooner than I expected.
So let's talk about it. What did it look like for you? What was your plan that you had, but it ended up changing?
I'll take it back to a friend of mine. He's actually my financial advisor, a good friend of mine. And we would always have conversations. He's a business owner as well. And as we were conversing, he would always ask me, when are you going to make that leap? When are you going to make that leap? So here I was in a position where kind of burning both ends of the candle. I had my full-time job, but I was also trying to work on Willful Change and building that up and really trying to get myself out there. And at some point, you're going to find yourself burning out. You know what I mean? Whenever he'd ask me that question, I would always kind of push it out to the future. So in my mind, 2025 was the ideal time because I knew that I wanted to work my way up into the company that I was working for, build enough capital so that I had some fallback money just in case things didn't necessarily work out the way that I was hoping for. But even then, it was something that I would taper off of. You know what I mean? I'd probably start from full-time to part-time and then go to a per diem and so on and so forth. But like I said, I felt that strong conviction when God was telling me this is the time. And that happened in September of 2023. And I'm a strong believer in the Bible that says faith without works is dead. So I drew up my letter of resignation, put a date on it. And when the date came, I walked away and never looked back.
When you're starting your business, how are you able to build a connection to the point where you're able to go into these corporations and have a plan and show them what your value and how you're able to help their leadership grow?
See, now I'm actually going to be giving you the secret sauce. Hopefully none of my former employers are watching this, but real talk, the position that I held with my former employer really was a position that was created. It wasn't one that was something that was already embedded into the fabric of the organization. So that allowed for me to have a lot of free time, okay? And because I had a lot of free time, I didn't necessarily have people that were checking in on me with the work that I was doing. Not to say that I was skipping out on my work. I was very good at what I did. In fact, I actually got promoted twice from the position that I originally started from. But because I had a lot of free time, that also gave me opportunities to venture within the community to work on additional projects that were still closely related with the work that I was doing that was also representing the organization. At the time, I didn't see the plan that was actually being built or the steps that was being laid out for, because I would find myself getting frustrated all the time because I'm like, no one cares. And the type of personality type that I have, I'm a type of person where I have to be seen. I have to get that recognition. I have to get that affirmation that I'm doing a good job. And I wasn't getting that. But again, the building blocks that were being set for me was allowing me to step out into the community and meet the people who are now turning out to be my clients. So these CEOs and these founders and these organizational leaders, I'm sitting at the table with them, either as an advisory board member, as a representative of my former employer, and I'm not even seeing the dots that are being connected. I'm networking right there. You understand what I'm saying? And now that I'm in a position where I have ventured off and started my own company, these are the people that I'm calling on now to say, I'm flying solo. Let's talk.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a cool story how you were able to realize that your position at your other job was really just giving you the chance to expand it to where you to where you really know where you belong.
Pretty much.
So as a public speaker as well, I'm trying to improve as it's like, what are some advice that you can give to me to improve my public speaking skills or just anybody in general?
Well, public speaking always starts with a story. You understand? Always starts with a story. And I would always say, never compare yourself to another public speaker.
Okay.
Because everyone's public story is unique to someone else's. It always starts with a story. And in that story, you always want to look out for what are the practical things that I can extract that I feel would be of value to the specific type of audience that I'm speaking to. You mentioned earlier that you had came to my keynote address last month. And in that, he gave you a whole bunch of stories. I gave you a whole list of all the different things that I had to experience. And it gave you the soup to nuts of how I left from New York, came to Massachusetts, and everything that kind of happened in between. But the key takeaways from that was focusing on the important soft skills that are essential for leadership: integrity, perseverance, humility. So again, it starts with the story, which is what's going to keep that person engaged, but making sure that for you, you're able to extract what's the practical things that folks would need to hear in order for them to apply it into their life so that they can walk away with something valuable. Does that make sense?
Yes. So how would you, let's say, for example, you're going to a corporation to speak rather than maybe you're going to like a college or elementary school or middle school, whatever it is.
Sure.
How are you able to make your story make sense to whatever age or whatever kind of corporation that you're speaking at?
Well, it always starts off with knowing your audience, right? So I like to do my research before I go into any sales call with a potential new client, any keynote speaking address, even with one of my coaching clients. I always try to gather some information beforehand so I know who it is that I'm going to be speaking. So the story never changes. I'm just looking now deeper into the story to find out what's going to attract or speak to that person. So if I'm going into an organization where I'm going to be addressing CEOs, right? Perhaps I want to start speaking about certain things that are going to speak to what speaks their language or something that's really going to resonate with them from a CEO perspective. And honestly speaking, the one that you heard is pretty universal,
Right.
because from a CEO all the way to an entry-level worker, integrity, perseverance, humility is always key, right? So it just really touches points on different things that are going to speak to that specific audience so that they can walk away with something practical. At the end of the day, the keynote is never about me. So it's about the person that's coming and how they can walk away with something valuable.
So when you're going and negotiating a contract, whether it's like you talked about corporations or just entry level speaking engagements, what are you able to do to make sure that they can see that you're actually valuable and are wanting you to come speak to them?
A lot of that goes into the pre-work. So if I'm have a potential client that I'm interested in, I like to also do my research to find out what's their annual operating budget. So first and foremost, I got to know if they're going to be willing to pay. I also look into their website to find out what are some of the things that they actually offer, right? Are they offering internal training for their leadership? Are they offering certain benefits around professional development? Right? Because that lets me know what type of organization that I'm dealing It tells me what their values are. Right? Because if they are already internally providing leadership development or professional development training, me coming in is nothing foreign to it. Because now there's less selling that I have to do because you're already doing this. Now it's just a matter of me bringing something different and adding something of value to what you're already doing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
At the end of the day, it's just like what you were saying in the book, right? Working smarter, not harder. I'm not trying to work hard to try to sell you on something that I have to offer them. You have to already see your need and the value of what it is that I can bring. And all I am is just presenting it in a nice package. Does that make sense?
Yes. So when you're going in and you're presenting these packages, are you, like you talked about, you're just plug it into their system to make sure that it fits where you are trying to get and also fits to improve their whatever is leadership, sales, whatever it is that you're speaking? How are you able to make sure that when you're going into these certain organizations, you're able to make sure that your speech or whatever it is that you're bringing to them is tailored strictly towards them to the point where they're like, okay, yeah, this guy, he was really good. We might want to have him back or whatever it is in that situation.
One of the things that I've always learned about good sales, they don't tell you things, they ask you questions, right? Same thing happens with a really great life coach or leadership coach. They don't focus on telling you things, they focus on asking questions because the client or the potential client is the person that has the answer of what it is that they're looking for. So I go in with the focus of asking you really great questions to uncover what it is that you are identifying as areas that you want to focus at, potential skill gaps, even pain points that they might be experiencing. Once I hear what it is that I need to hear, and now I just plug in my solution. So again, the research always comes first, right? Because I want to identify that this person actually meets the criteria of the type of client that I want to work with, number one. And then when I'm coming in with the questions that I need to ask based on how you're responding to them, it's just a plug and play.
Kind of want to talk to, like you said, you want to make sure that they meet your criteria. So let's talk about it. When is it like a job or something that you know, maybe it's not a good fit for me, and how do you end up working on those situations?
So that's a really great question. So when someone is not a good fit, number one, some internally you'll feel just from the connection. I'm a relationship type of person. And if I don't feel that there's actual connection just from that initial meeting, whether it's in person, whether it's through Zoom, on the phone, whatever it is, that usually gives me that first indication. Secondly, if I feel that what it is that I'm trying to offer you, which is actually going to benefit your organization in the long term, is something that doesn't align with your values or even my values, that's something that I feel like is a deal breaker. And lastly, at the end of the day, like I said, if this is something where I feel that the communication, because communication for me is big, as well as customer service, right? So what I'm putting out there, I'm expecting, or I put high expectations to come back. Communication is key. If I feel like communication is something that is dead in the water and I constantly have to chase you to get things going, especially if this is something that you've expressed an interest in, that's where I feel is best that we sever ties and cut our losses and part company.
So when you know it's like time to just say, okay, I don't want to work with you no more, we aren't a good fit, rather than maybe they just didn't understand when you first explained it, and then you explain a little more to the point that they do understand.
Kind of, again, going back to asking those really good questions. And that's something that I find myself constantly working on to get better because I don't like those uncomfortable conversations. Asking those hard questions around what's the best way to get in contact with you, or what's the best form for us to stay in touch with each other, making sure anytime I'm leaving a meeting with someone, the deliverables are very clear. You understand what you need to do. I understand what I need to bring to the table, and so on and so forth. But again, it's really getting that clarity to make sure that what it is that I'm saying is actually being received the way that I intended. One of the trainings that I actually teach on is around effective communication, but also communicating with impact. That's actually a book that I would recommend that you would pick up. It's called Communicating with Impact. The author is not coming to me right now, but a really great book that really breaks down essential qualities or essential skills for communicating with impact, obviously. And that word impact is broken down into an acronym. The first three pieces really focuses on the internal work or the preparatory work that you need to do before you actually go into a conversation. So first and foremost, identifying what is your intention for that conversation, right? Because your intention now is what's going to shape The M and impact, which is your message. And your message is what you're going to say, your words. And those words and everything that you have, again, is all coming back to the original intent of what it is that you're trying to communicate, which you also take into consideration the P, which is the personality of the person with whom you're going to speak to. So as you're taking those three things into consideration, that should provide you with really great clarity around, was my message as clear as it needed to be, right? And if it wasn't, where do I need to clarify certain things so that there aren't any mishaps moving forward? So I think that's a really great question that you're asking in terms of, was I clear, or was there just a disconnect between what it was that was trying to be communicated or what was actually received?
So I want to go, you talked about P. I think that one was like really caught me off guard because you said you talk or have communication differently depending on their personality. So how is the person's personality changing the way of the conversation that you're going to have with somebody?
Everyone receives information different. So if someone has more of a dominant personality, very cut to the chase, they don't give me any fluff, that's someone who I know that I would need to tailor my communication to be very straightforward. I know my personality type is very influential, right? I like to tell things and speak to people in metaphors and stories. I like to paint a picture for you when I'm presenting something, right? So for me to keep me engaged, that's the way someone would need to communicate something to me. Give it to me in a metaphor, give me examples, give me a story that I can actually follow, because I like to put myself into what it is that's being communicated so that I could have a deeper connection with the person who's communicating with. Somebody that has more of a dominant personality, I lose them the minute I start giving them story. So that's why I have to take into consideration personality types are different things that will let me know how is it best for me to communicate to ensure that whatever it is that I'm intending is actually received by the receiver.
Okay, so when you're speaking and you're speaking to different personalities, whether like you talk about corporation or entry level, how are you able to tailor your messages to a point where a dominant person can actually get interested while you're telling your story as well?
So you fluctuate, right? So obviously if you're in a keynote or something like that, things are going to be a little bit different. You can't kind of speak to one personality type because there's probably multiple personality types there. So as you're communicating, you want to make sure that you are first focusing on what's your objective, first and foremost. And this is another book that I want to recommend to you, is by John C. Maxwell, which is called Everyone Communicates, Few Connect, right?
Okay.
And in that book, it gives you a breakdown of the importance of not just simply communicating to somebody, but actually going in with the intention to make a connection. And after each chapter, it gives you a breakdown of how to apply each of those chapters from a one-on-one standpoint, in a small group standpoint, and then from a large audience standpoint. So in a large audience standpoint, I always try to focus on speaking to the different personality types in a sense. So there are going to be times where I'm going to be very straightforward with certain points, and that's where I'm preparing. I always prepare how I want to say certain things so that it could have that kind of shock and awe in the conversation. There are going to be times where I'm going to tell a story, right? That's going to speak to those folks that have a similar personality type in mind. But there's also going to be times where I'm also going to be sharing facts, because there are some people that don't focus on the emotions of things. They only deal in facts, whether the facts and the figures, and how do you give me that? Just give me that information, because that's what really resonates with me. So in any type of keynote, you really want to just make sure that as you're sharing your story, you're not sharing it based on what fits best for you, but you're shaping it based on what the audience is going to, how the audience is going to receive. Does that make sense?
Yes. So you talk about how you're always prepared when you're speaking. Let's say you go in a room and the way that you prepare your speech is not how the audience is really receiving it. So how are you able to adjust on the fly to make sure that your speech is catered to the way that the audience will like to perceive your message?
That's a good question. It takes a high level of awareness, self-awareness, but also being able to read the room. I like to pay attention to body language. I like to pay attention to affect, right? Facial expressions. I pay attention to who's engaging. And one of the things that I'm very intentional about was when I'm having the keynote or whatever it is, even if it's a training, I always try to zero in on people, right? You were at my keynote, you were able to see that. Very intentional about that, right? Where I'll actually walk by connect with a person, give a light touch, because again, I want to gauge where I am with that person. Because again, my objective in any communication is to make a connection, not to just communicate my message, right? So if I need to make an adjustment on the fly, or if I feel that something's not resonating with the person, I might take a step back. I might engage them by asking a question, right? Does that make sense? I keep asking you that. Does that make sense? Or did that really resonate? Or where have I might lost you, or anything of that nature? So I'm checking for clarity to make sure that what it is that I'm intending is actually being received how I intend.
So for me, I'm a beginner plus speaker. I've been speaking for probably about 5 to 6 months now.
Sure.
My prices are probably way lower than yours. So how do I get to a point where I'm able to level up to a point where I'm able to say, okay, I'm not going to speak for less than 10K or whatever the price is?
So price is always a tricky thing, right? Because we always want to know, what should I charge? Because when I first started my business, first thing that I was asked, what should I charge for training? What should I charge for coaching? Should I charge it by hour? So on and so forth. So it's all about what you feel that you are worth for the story that you have to bring to the table. Obviously, you also want to take into consideration the skill of your ability to really communicate and connect with the audience, right? So you could determine that based on where you feel or how you feel you're growing in your ability to effectively communicate, but to also tell a story that really truly resonates with people. How you can gauge that is based on the level of demand that you're getting from the market. So if people are blowing up your phone and saying, yo, Mike, we need you to come out here and come speak, and your calendar is looking crazy all month, yeah, I think it's time for you to start upping your price. You know what I mean? So if you starting off at $300 for a keynote for about, let's say, an hour, but your calendar is telling you that you're in high demand, basic business, supply, demand. If the demand is high, the price goes up.
So when you first started till now, as a public speaker and also as a business owner, what has been your biggest obstacle and how have you been able to overcome it?
Self is the biggest obstacle. Because internally, we go through that battle within ourselves where we're always focusing on, how are people going to perceive me? Am I saying the right thing? Did I impress this person? So on and so forth. When we can get out of our own head, stop focusing on self and put the focus on the person that really matters, which is the person that we're trying to communicate with, it makes things a lot easier. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight, because I still deal with that. I have my moments, even with the last keynote, where I was in my head. I'm trying to figure out, how do I want to say this? When do I want to conflict this type of a tone, and so on and so forth. But once I can get out of my own head and just focus on telling the story, to make sure that the person who's coming is going to get the value out of it that I intended for them to get out of it, it just starts to flow.
I'm glad you said that, because that's been like one of the biggest things when I'm speaking. I talk about self because like I always say that my hardest and my biggest obstacle when it comes to my business and speaking has definitely been myself. I've always had to overcome my overthinking and my negative thoughts. So I thought it was cool for us to see an experience.
Yeah.
A speaker say the same things that you're struggling with, the similar things that I'm struggling. So I'm not too far off on that at all. I thought that was pretty cool to think that somebody that's experienced and has been doing this for a while has similar negatives, like not negatives, but like similar cons to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But so how have you been able to overcome yourself?
It's simply said, which is denying self, taking self out of the equation. But it's one of the hardest things to do, because when you're growing up, they always tell you, you always hear words like self-esteem. As you get older, you hear in the workforce, self-care. Everything is always pointing on self. Think of yourself. To develop that selfless mindset is going to be contrary to everything that you've learned throughout your life. So it's something that's going to have to happen constantly. And it can start with small things, just like in a conversation. Something that you could possibly try to start getting into that selfless mindset is, when you get into a conversation, make the conversation about the other person. You're already in that, because as a person that's doing interviews, you focus on asking that person questions. Oftentimes when we're in a conversation, we're not really paying attention to what the other person's saying. We're already thinking of, where can I jump in? How I want to respond? Yeah. What's my response? I already have 10 responses lined up in my head for something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how we operate. because we're always focused on self. Being a keynote speaker is a selfless profession. It's not about you. So how you get to that place is self-denial. And it starts with the small things. You're having a conversation with somebody, make it about them. Even if they try to put it back on you, yeah, I'm doing good. Life is going all right. But tell me something about your day. As denying self. Make sense?
Yes. How have you been able to use that more like reflecting, being selfless in conversation and speaking? How has that improved your, like you talk about like that self barrier that you had to overcome?
It helps me to be more other people minded. I'm focused on others. And when I can focus on others a lot more, it brings a level of authenticity. It brings out a level of humility. And that's something that can be felt. Because the reality is, the minute you step into a room for any keynote address, any training, the participants are already sizing you up. They look at everything. The way you dress, your appearance, they look at every single thing. All the way to when the first words that come out of your mouth. Because as a speaker, you have 2 minutes to captivate their attention. If you can't captivate them in that first 2 to 5 minutes, you've already lost them, and it's 10 times harder to get them back in. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So being very mindful with your intention of coming in with a selfless mindset that can be felt. One of my favorite speakers, John Maxwell, and even Simon Sinek, certain things that I pay attention to, especially John Maxwell, he does a lot of this where he'll open up his keynotes with, you guys are going to learn something amazing today. I'm excited to be here with you guys. You see how that's selfless?
Yeah.
My opening is focused on what you're going to take away from today, because now I'm building anticipation with that statement. When I say something like, I'm excited to be here, that means it's a treat for me to be in your presence, not the other way around. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Most speakers is like, yeah, you just paid $1,000 to come and see me speak. I'm the man. I'm excited to be here. It's an honor. It's a privilege. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Understand what I'm saying? Even with just the intro, like you noticed in my intro at the keynote that you came to, first thing I did, I checked to make sure everyone could hear. And then I jumped right on into it. I X'd out all the fluff. My name is this. Here's my background. This is what I've done. I got X debris. I made it about them. I got right into it. You understand what I'm saying? Because now that gets people to perk. Wow, if I miss something, I might miss something good. Make sense?
So how were you able to develop that skill of being able to captivate the audience?
I like to say some of it is natural just because of my personality type. I think that a lot of my ability to connect with people isn't, some people say it's contagious. I have a natural charisma about how you can build some of those skills is, again, really going back to having a selfless mindset, but also just paying attention to what other speakers are doing. So for me, anytime I know that I have a speaking engagement that's coming, the build up to that day, I still have butterflies in my stomach, still to this day, even though my first speaking engagement was when I was 6, but I like to watch other people. So I'll go and I'll listen to a Simon Sinek. I'll go and I'll listen to a Les Brown. I'll go and I'll listen to a John C. Maxwell, because I want to pay attention to all the different things that they're doing and how could I apply that to myself. But the first rule of thumb that I will always say is be authentic, because people could smell that fakeness from a mile away. Be who you are. You understand what I'm saying? And because even me, I've been watching, some of the stuff that you've been doing, and even with the podcast and some of the videos that your dad will post, I'll pay attention to, because like I said, people will size you up from the minute you walk into a room. And one of the things that I always notice is the hairstyle and even how you dress. It's authentic. It's you. Yeah. You're not trying to be anybody that you're not. You understand? Because someone could have told you, wear a suit, wear a shirt, button it up to the top. Make sure your hair is pressed the right way. But you're 17, you're 18. That's not you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That may be you 10 years from now, but for the right now, You're going to come in with the Ugg slides on. You're going to come in with the sweats. You're going to have the hoodie on because that speaks to your audience and it's communicating, I'm authentic, and your audience appreciates it.
So for somebody that might struggle with trying to fit in and don't want to be like their authentic self because they might not like, or like you might see it as somebody won't like me for who I am, how could somebody build the confidence to just be themselves?
They can hire me as their coach. Okay. That's it takes work. It takes work. First and foremost, recognizing that you have a challenge and that's something that you want to work on. But it's also stepping out of comfort zone, even if it's taking a small step, right? Because it's a lot of what advice that people can give. Because I can sit here and share advice up to wazoo, but it's a lot easier said than done. That doesn't mean that you're going to apply it. Because the minute you start to feel that discomfort, you're going to revert back to your default, right? So finding what does make you uncomfortable and you break that down into smaller chunks and say, okay, I'm going to take this one step and see how that feels. So it's always a build up, right? It actually reminds me of a training that I was doing with my dog, right? I know that he can be very timid in certain areas, but I wanted to train him how to jump over like a barrier so that he can come and get the toy that I was holding in my hand because he likes to do a lot of bite work. But I knew that he would be very timid in doing that. So I started off with something very small. I put like a little broomstick. That's light. Doesn't take a lot of jumping that he has to do, but he was able to do it, right? And then as we go, I put something a little bit higher, then a little bit higher. And before you know it, he was actually jumping over something that was this high. But it was a build-up.
Yeah.
But he had to start with one small step. That makes sense?
Yeah. I've got one more question for you. It's what's one fun fact about yourself that nobody really knows?
Fun fact about myself that nobody knows. I did say my first keynote was at 6. I swam with dolphins.
How was that experience like?
Beautiful.
Really?
I'm an animal guy, but yeah, it was beautiful. I did that in Mexico on my honeymoon with my wife.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really just want to thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. I appreciate it. So before we end, I want to thank everybody for the support that you've shown on my podcast. Ways that you can support even more is by going on to my website at realisticCEO.com and order your copy of Realistic CEO. It's not only an inspiring book for children, but it's inspiring to all generations. The main character, Tony, he ends up starting a lemonade book at lemonade stand when he was in elementary school and turned that lemonade stand into a successful lemonade business. So check out the book, order it, share your thoughts on it. Thank you. See you in the next one. Peace.